A lot of survival stories get told like myths, big claims, vague miracles, and no details. But the real history is quieter and honestly more impressive. In different eras of shortage, war gardens, rural hard times, long winters, families leaned on specific plants that were easy to grow, reliable to store, and useful in more than one way. Some were calorie crops. Some were nutrient backstops. Some were bitter tonic herbs that people trusted, even if the science we have today explains them differently. In this Rooty Fruity episode, we're not romanticizing the past. We're doing a careful walk through 10 plants that were once common enough to keep households steady because they tolerated poor soil, bounced back after rough weather, or offered edible leaves when cupboards ran thin. We'll look at what parts were actually used, how they were grown, what they realistically provide, and what traditions around them meant in their own cultural context, without turning them into guarantees. If you've ever wondered what forgotten really means in a garden, it often just means no longer sold at the supermarket. Number 1 plant is Jerusalem artichoke, often called sunchoke, and it's a quiet insurance crop. In hard seasons, families valued it because it hides its harvest underground. Knobby tubers you can dig as needed, even after the first frosts have emptied most beds. Despite the confusing name, it's a sunflower relative, not an artichoke, and the plant's entire strategy is simple. Grow tall in summer, then store energy where cold can't reach it. That reliability mattered in rural kitchen gardens across parts of Europe and North America, where dependable starch could steady a meal plan when grain or potatoes were scarce. From a horticulture angle, sunchokes are forgiving. They tolerate cold, accept mediocre soil, and still push up vigorous stems with bright yellow blooms. The tubers contain inulin, a carbohydrate that can act as a prebiotic for some people, but it can also cause gas in others. That's why traditional preparation often leaned on roasting, long simmering, or fermentation, and why small portions were common until you knew how your body handled it. For growing conditions, plant tubers in early spring in full sun for the best yield. Water consistently while shoots establish. Then ease off. Mature plants handle dry spells better than many vegetables. Loose, well-drained soil makes harvesting easier, but even heavier ground works if you're patient with a fork. In some folk traditions, a thick stand symbolized steadiness and provision. Not a promise of luck, more a reminder that resilience can be planted. Number 2 plant is stinging nettle, and it's the plant people learned to respect before they learned to cook it. When early spring gardens were still bare, nettle patches offered something precious. Fast, mineral-rich greens. Across Europe and part of Asia, it wasn't famine food in the insulting sense. It was a seasonal staple, turned into soups, dumpling fillings, and teas, especially when store foods were running low and fresh vitamins were scarce. The sting comes from tiny hollow hairs that irritate skin, but heat and drying neutralize them, which is why traditional kitchens treated nettle like a serious ingredient, not a dare. Nutritionally, nettle leaves are known for being high in minerals like iron and calcium, and for providing chlorophyll and plant compounds that give it that deep green, almost oceanic smell when it hits a hot pot. Modern herbal traditions sometimes associate nettle with clearing or protection. If you hear that, treat it as cultural language for a plant that felt strengthening after winter, not a guaranteed outcome. In the garden, nettle thrives in nitrogen-rich soil and partial sun to full sun, often near compost piles, fence lines, or damp edges. It likes consistent moisture, but is hard to kill once established. For safe harvesting, use gloves. Snip the top young growth before it flowers and blanch or dry the leaves before use. One practical bonus: nettle can be steeped into a mild plant tea fertilizer for other crops, though it should be diluted and used as a general tonic rather than a miracle booster. Next, we'll look at a plant that stores well on shelves, not just in the soil. Number 3 plant is Purslane, a plant most people step over, without realizing they're walking past food. In many places, it was never forgotten at all, just mislabeled as a weed. During tough years, that mattered, because Purslane volunteers aggressively in cracks, dry beds, and neglected corners, offering edible greens when cultivated crops struggled. Historically, it shows up in Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cooking, and it traveled widely enough that you'll find versions of Purslane salads, pickles, and stews across continents. What makes it useful is its texture and water storage. Those small, fleshy leaves hold moisture like a tiny succulent, staying tender even in heat. Nutritionally, Purslane is notable for containing omega-3 fatty acids in its leaves, along with vitamins and minerals. The flavor is lemony and slightly salty, with a clean crunch that feels almost refreshing in summer. Traditional beliefs sometimes linked purslane with cooling the body or bringing balance. You can treat that as an old way of describing its hydrating, tart character rather than a promise of healing. Growing is simple. Purslane thrives in full sun, tolerates poor soil, and needs surprisingly little water once established. If you want it as a crop instead of surprise, sow it shallowly after frost and harvest young stems frequently to keep it branching. It's well suited to hot patios, raised beds, and garden edges where other greens bolt. A practical safety note: purslane naturally contains oxalates, so people prone to kidney stones often moderate intake, and pair it with calcium-rich foods. Next, we'll move from a heat-loving volunteer to a plant families relied on because it was easy to dry and store through winter. Number 4 plant is lamb's quarters, the wild spinach that kept showing up even when nothing else cooperated. In older kitchen gardens, it was often tolerated on purpose, half weed, half backup plan, because it grows fast, reseeds freely, and offers an impressive amount of leafy food from a small patch. During hard stretches, families use the young leaves like spinach in soups, pies, and simple sautéed greens, while some communities also use the tiny seed in porridges when grain was limited. You can recognize it by the soft, pale dusting on new growth, almost like it's been lightly powdered. That coating is one reason it handles sun and wind so well. Nutritionally, lamb's quarters is known for vitamins and minerals and has a richer, earthier taste than spinach. Pleasantly green, not delicate. In traditional belief, plants that return year after year sometimes carry an association of endurance or household protection. Taken practically, lamb's quarters earn that symbolism by feeding people reliably, not by guaranteeing outcomes. As a grower, you don't need to baby it. It thrives in full sun to partial shade, tolerates average soil, and often pops up in disturbed ground, along paths or near compost. Harvest the top few inches while it's young and tender. Once it gets tall, the leaves can become tougher and more assertive in flavor. Like many leafy greens, it contains oxalates, so moderation and cooking are common sense choices, especially for people sensitive to them. The best part is the timing. It arrives when spring greens are exciting, then keeps coming through summer heat when lettuces give up. Next, we'll look at a plant family is leaned on because it could be stored for months without fancy equipment. Number 5 plant is Amaranth, a 2-in-1 survival plant. Greens early, grain later. That double utility is exactly why it mattered to families, especially in places where heat, unpredictable rain, or thin soils made conventional grains unreliable. In the Andes and Mesoamerica, different amaranths were important food plants for centuries, and later they showed up in homestead plots elsewhere because they don't ask for perfect conditions. When you run your fingers over the leaves, they feel slightly velvety. When the seed heads form, they look almost sculptural, like tassels or soft plumes catching the sun. From a nutrition angle, leaf amaranth is a robust leafy green, while grain amaranth produces tiny seeds that cook into porridge-like meals. The seeds are known for being relatively high in protein compared with many cereal grains, and they store well when thoroughly dried. One reason they fit the Save Families theme without needing romantic language. Culturally, amaranth has carried symbolism around resilience and continuity in some traditions. It's better to understand that as a reflection of its staying power in harsh weather, not as a promise of prosperity. For growing conditions, amaranth loves warmth and full sun. Sow after frost when soil is warmed, thin seedlings for airflow, and water consistently early on. Once established, many varieties handle dry spells better than tender greens. Rich soil increases leaf size, but even average ground can produce usable harvests. Harvest young leaves repeatedly to keep plants branching, then let a few mature to seed. When seed heads dry, you can rub them to release grain, winnow away chaff, and store the seeds in airtight jars. Next, we'll move to a plant that wasn't glamorous, but it filled jars and cellars when winter felt long. Number 6 plant is Moringa, sometimes called the drumstick tree, and it earned its reputation because almost every part had a use. In South Asia and parts of Africa, families didn't treat it as a trendy superfood. They treated it as a backyard resource. Young leaves cooked like spinach, long pods sliced into curries and stews, and seeds sometimes used in practical household ways. In hot climates, that matters. A tree that keeps producing edible greens through dry spells becomes a kind of living pantry. The leaves are nutrient-dense, which is why Moringa shows up in nutrition programs and home gardens alike, but it's still not a magic fix. It's a useful food that works best as part of a varied diet. Traditional beliefs sometimes frame Moringa as protective or cleansing, cultural shorthand for a plant that felt strengthening when other greens were scarce. From a horticulture perspective, Moringa loves heat and sun. It thrives in full sun, tolerates drought once established, and prefers well-drained soil. Heavy, waterlogged ground can cause root problems. In warm regions, it can be grown as a perennial tree, while in cooler climates, it's often grown in a large container and overwintered indoors, or treated as a seasonal plant. Regular pruning keeps it bushy and brings the leaves within easy reach. There's a satisfying snap when you cut a soft green stem, and the scent is fresh, slightly peppery. Water deeply, but let the soil dry between waterings, especially in pots. Harvest leaves often, but leave enough growth for the plant to recover. Next, we'll step away from trees and into a plant that families relied on because it could sit in a cellar for months and still feel like a meal. Number 7 plant is Cassava, and it belongs in any honest Save Families list because it's a calorie crop that thrives where others fail, while also demanding respect. In parts of South America, Africa, and Asia, cassava became a cornerstone because it tolerates heat, poor soil, and irregular rainfall, producing bulky roots that can keep households fed when grain harvests disappoint. But it isn't a casual snack plant. Many cassava varieties contain cyanogenic compounds, and traditional processing, peeling, grating, soaking, fermenting, and thorough cooking exists for a reason. That's not folklore. It's food safety engineering passed down through kitchens. When properly prepared, cassava becomes flour, flatbreads, porridges, or chewy starch staples that store and travel well. The plant itself is striking. Palmate leaves like open hands, and thick roots hidden beneath dry soil. Culturally, cassava has been associated with endurance and survival in communities that rely on it. That symbolism tracks with how steady it is in difficult climates, not with guaranteed outcomes. For growing conditions, cassava wants warmth, a long frost-free season, and full sun. It prefers well-drained soil but will still yield in poorer ground. Plant stem cuttings rather than seeds, water to establish, then keep it on the drier side to avoid rot. Harvest timing varies by variety and climate, but families often dug roots as needed rather than all at once. One practical note: roots don't keep long once harvested, so processing soon after digging is part of the system. Next, we'll move from tropical roots to a humble plant that turns small yards into winter nutrition. Number 8 plant is collard greens. Unflashy, sturdy, and historically tied to the kind of cooking that stretches a household through winter. In the American South, collards became central not because they were trendy, but because they were dependable. Big leaves, repeated harvests, and a plant that can keep producing when temperatures dip low enough to slow down everything else. More broadly, many brassicas, kales, cabbages, mustards served a similar role across Europe and Asia. Greens that tolerate cold, store well in the field, and turn into real meals with simple fats and salt. Collards have that thick leaf texture that holds up in a pot. The smell when they simmer is earthy and sweet, especially after a light frost, which can convert some starches into sugars and soften bitterness. Traditional beliefs around collards often center on prosperity greens, eaten at certain holidays. It's best understood as cultural symbolism. Greens as a visual shorthand for renewal and abundance, rather than a promise that a leaf can change your bank account. Horticulture is straightforward. Collards prefer full sun, fertile soil with steady moisture and good airflow. They handle light frosts well and often taste better after cold snaps. Start from seed or transplants. Keep soil evenly moist and mulch to stabilize temperature. Harvest outer leaves first, so the plant keeps growing from the center, which makes a true cut-and-come-again crop. Realistic benefits include reliable vitamins and fiber, plus a fresh harvest window when many gardens are quiet. Next, we'll close the list with a plant that families trusted for its durability and its ability to feed both people and soil. Number 9 plant is Cowpea. often called black-eyed pea, and it's the kind of plant you grow when you need food and you can't guarantee rain. In West Africa, cowpeas have long been a staple, and through the Atlantic world, they became an essential survival legume because they handle heat and poorer soils better than many beans. That resilience translated into real household security. Fresh pods and leaves early, then dry peas that store for months. You can hear the practicality in traditional recipes. Simple stews, rice dishes, and pot meals built to feed many people without wasting anything. From a garden perspective, cowpeas are also quietly generous to the soil. Like other legumes, they partner with nitrogen-fixing bacteria in their root nodules, which can improve soil fertility over time. They don't make fertilizer out of thin air, but they do help convert atmospheric nitrogen into forms plants can use, especially when residues are returned to the bed. Culturally, black-eyed peas appear in New Year traditions linked with luck and prosperity. Present-day celebrations often keep that symbolism alive, but historically it also reflects something concrete, a humble crop that reliably filled bowls when conditions were harsh. For growing conditions, sow cowpeas after frost in full sun and warm soil. They prefer well-drained ground, need modest watering to establish, and then tolerate dry spells. Provide light support for vining types, or choose bush varieties for tight spaces. Harvest young pods for fresh eating, or let them dry on the plant for storage. The taste is nutty and comforting, and the dry peas turn into a pantry staple that feels like a plan. Next, we'll finish with a plant that fed families and quietly rebuilt the ground under their feet. Number 10 plant is sorghum, a grain that behaves like a lifeboat in hot, uncertain weather. Long before it was marketed as gluten-free, sorghum mattered because it could stand up to drought and still put seed in the head. In parts of Africa and South Asia, it has fed families for centuries as porridge, flatbread, and fermented staples, and it's spread into dryland farming elsewhere for the same reason. It doesn't collapse the moment rain gets unreliable. There's a sturdy beauty to it. The tall canes, the heavy seed panicles, the way a mature stand rustles like dry paper in afternoon heat. From a horticulture and agronomy angle, sorghum's deep rooting and efficient water use make it more tolerant of dry spells than many cereals. Its grain stores well when fully dried, which is the difference between we harvested and we can eat later. Traditional beliefs around sorghum in some communities connect it with endurance and protection, often expressed in harvest rituals or customary foods. Taken respectfully, that's cultural memory built around a crop that reliably kept hunger away, not a claim of guaranteed outcomes. Growing sorghum in a garden is possible if you have space and warmth. Sow after frost and full sun, in well-drained soil, and keep moisture consistent during early growth. Once established, it needs less irrigation than corn, though steady water improves grain fill. Harvest when seed heads are dry and firm, then finish drying under cover before threshing. Even the stalks can be useful, mulch, animal fodder, or in some types, sweet syrup production. Another reason families valued it as a whole plant resource. That completes our 10, but the bigger lesson is simple. Resilience is often something you can plant.